There is a town in Kentucky built entirely inside the scar of a meteorite strike, and most of the people who live there have never thought about it twice. There is a river that used to run straight through a downtown until the people who lived there decided to move a mountain instead. There is a waterfall that makes its own rainbow at night out of nothing but moonlight and mist. There is a spill of black sludge 30 times larger than the Exxon Valdez that is still sitting in the water table more than 2 decades later. And there is a flood that broke measuring equipment that was built specifically to measure floods. Every one of these things is real, documented, and sitting quietly in the folds of eastern Kentucky, a region most of the country only sees in passing, if it sees it at all. This is the geography outsiders never hear about, and none of it needs exaggeration to be strange. Before we get into it, hit subscribe because this channel exists to dig up the parts of American geography that never make the postcards. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. If you're from this stretch of Appalachia, you already know half of what's coming, and you're probably going to correct me on the other half. Good. That's the point. Let's start at the bottom of the list and climb. Number 17. Middlesboro, Kentucky. This is a city built inside a crater. Roughly 300 million years ago, a meteorite the size of a football field slammed into what would eventually become southeastern Kentucky, punching out a basin more than 3.5 miles across. Geologists confirmed the impact decades ago by finding shatter cones, distinctive rock patterns that only form under the pressure of a space collision embedded in the sandstone nearby. It is one of only 3 confirmed meteorite impact sites in the entire state. Middlesboro sits entirely within that bowl today. Streets and homes laid out inside the print left by a rock that fell from orbit, with the surrounding rim of Cumberland Mountain still rising on every side like the edge of a bathtub. Nobody chose the site because of the crater. They just built where the land was flat, never realizing the flatness itself was the evidence. Number 16. Pine Mountain. This is not a single peak, it's a ridge, and it runs unbroken for roughly 125 miles from Tennessee into Virginia through the heart of southeastern Kentucky. It exists because of a thrust fault, a place where ancient tectonic pressure shoved one slab of rock up and over another. When highway crews cut through Pound Gap in the 90s to widen US 23, they sliced the mountain open and exposed the fault line for anyone to see. Rock layers stacked in the wrong order, flipped by forces from 300 million years ago. The displacement along that fault runs roughly 7.5 miles, meaning rock that should sit thousands of feet underground now stands exposed at the surface, tilted and folded like a book someone tried to close too fast. It's now studied by geologists from around the world who travel here specifically to see one thrust fault laid bare in cross-section. Locals just call it the mountain that never lets up, because from Tennessee to Virginia, there are only a handful of gaps wide enough to drive through. Number 15. The Cumberland Gap and the Old Wilderness Road. This narrow notch in the mountains was the only practical opening for early travel between Virginia and Kentucky, and as many as 300,000 settlers funneled through it between the 1770s and 1810. The terrain made ambush easy, and for years raiding parties used the 100 miles between the Gap and Crab Orchard as hunting ground for isolated travelers. In the brutal winter of 1778, the Kentucky River froze 2 feet thick, and settlers ate their own frozen cattle and horses just to survive until spring. More than 100 men, women, and children were killed along this same stretch of road in a single autumn in 1784. The mountains didn't care how many people were counting on getting through them, and for decades, this narrow gap was the only realistic door into the entire western frontier. Number 14. Black Mountain. At 4,145 feet, this is the highest point in Kentucky, and for most of the 20th century, the public didn't fully own it. Coal companies controlled the summit, and hikers needed a signed waiver just to legally set foot near the top. The state didn't secure the peak until 1999. Coal seams reportedly converge underneath the summit, and companies have long claimed the ground there is prone to collapse as a result. The peak also supports a rare northern hardwood forest, home to plant species found nowhere else in Kentucky, clinging on above the 3,000-foot line while coal operations worked the slopes just below it for a century. The tallest place in the state sits directly on top of the industry that shaped everything below it. Number 13. Red River Gorge. This canyon system inside the Daniel Boone National Forest holds the highest concentration of natural sandstone arches anywhere east of the Mississippi River. More than 100 confirmed spans carved by wind and water over millions of years. The rock itself is banded in red, orange, and brown iron minerals dragged through the sandstone by groundwater over millions of years, which is part of why the whole formation is nicknamed the Red. Climbers scramble the backsides of some arches for the view, a practice the Forest Service flags as genuinely dangerous, because sandstone erodes quietly and gives no warning before it lets go. The gorge looks ancient and permanent. It is neither. It is still actively falling apart, one grain at a time, exactly the way it was built. Number 12. Cumberland Falls. This waterfall does something almost nowhere else on the planet does reliably. It produces a moonbow, a rainbow made from moonlight instead of sunlight, visible several nights a month around the full moon. Victoria Falls in Africa is the only other site on Earth where this happens on a predictable schedule, which makes Cumberland Falls the only regular moonbow in the entire Western Hemisphere. The physics require an exact combination of mist, angle, and darkness, and the falls only cooperate because of a geographic accident, the way the 68-foot drop faces almost due north, letting moonlight strike the rising mist at just the right angle. Get the timing wrong by a single night, or let clouds roll in, and you've driven hours to stand in front of a waterfall that looks like every other waterfall. Number 11. Breaks Interstate Park, straddling the Kentucky-Virginia line. Locals call it the Grand Canyon of the South, and while that title oversells it a little, the Russell Fork River has genuinely carved a gorge here that runs 5 miles long and, in its deepest sections, plunges roughly 1,600 feet. Daniel Boone himself tried to push through this canyon in 1767 and gave up, driven back by copperheads, rattlesnakes, and sheer rock walls. Today, the same river that beat Boone hosts Class 4 to Class 6 whitewater, some of the most technical paddling in the country, and the canyon walls in places climb 1,300 feet in barely half a mile. The canyon hasn't gotten any friendlier. It's just gotten a parking lot. Number 10. The Pikeville Cut-Through. In the 1970s, the town of Pikeville got tired of flooding, so it moved a mountain. Engineers sliced through Peach Orchard Mountain, rerouted the Lavissa Fork River, relocated a railroad, and rebuilt a 4-lane highway through the gap they created, moving nearly 18 million cubic yards of earth in the process. It's still ranked among the largest earth-moving projects in the Western Hemisphere. The old riverbed became 240 acres of new downtown. The project sliced a channel roughly 3/4 of a mile long and over 500 feet deep straight through solid rock. It took 14 years and cost $77 million, and it worked, mostly because the town simply refused to keep losing to the water. If you're still with me, subscribe now, because the entries left on this list are the ones locals argue about hardest, and they only get bigger from here. Number 9. Distance itself is dangerous in this region. Every Appalachian county in Kentucky has a life expectancy below the national average, and most fall below the state average too. Public health researchers point to a blunt cause: no interstate highways cut through much of this terrain, no mass transit exists to fill the gap. And specialists are often a long, winding drive away. Dozens of Kentucky counties don't have their own hospital at all, meaning a heart attack or a bad car wreck can mean a drive of 30, 40, sometimes 60 minutes over winding two-lane roads before anyone reaches an emergency room. A medical emergency here isn't just a health problem, it's a geography problem first. The mountains that make this place beautiful are the same mountains that decide how fast an ambulance can reach you. Number 8. Mountaintop removal mining has physically flattened the region. More than 1 million acres of Kentucky land have been surface mined, and researchers estimate roughly 300 mountains in the state alone have been leveled outright. A Duke University study found decades of this mining made parts of central Appalachia measurably flatter, the average slope of the land dropping by more than 10 degrees. Some operations remove 600 feet or more of elevation to reach a coal seam only a few feet thick, and the leftover rock and soil is typically pushed into neighboring valleys, burying the small headwater streams that used to slow rainfall down before it reached anyone's home. You cannot blow the top off a mountain and expect the water below to behave the way it always has. The land forgot how to hold rain the way it used to. Number 7. Black lung disease has come back from the edge of extinction. By the late 1990s, cases had dropped to their lowest point on record, and doctors believed the disease was nearly beaten. It wasn't. In central Appalachia, which includes Kentucky, more than 1 in 5 miners with 25 or more years of experience now show signs of the disease, the highest rate recorded in 25 years. Researchers point to thinner coal seams, which force miners to cut through more silica-heavy rock to reach the same amount of coal their fathers and grandfathers once pulled from thicker veins. The most severe form of the disease is now showing up in younger miners and progressing faster than doctors have ever recorded. The ground didn't get safer. It got harder to mine, and that difference is now sitting in people's lungs. Number 6. On October 11, 2000, a coal slurry impoundment in Martin County broke through into an abandoned mine shaft beneath it. An estimated 306 million gallons of black sludge poured out, roughly 30 times the volume of the Exxon Valdez oil spill. And it moved down 2 creek systems into the Tug Fork and Big Sandy rivers, coating more than 100 miles of waterway. The spill happened after midnight, when a slurry pond broke through into an old abandoned mine shaft sitting almost directly beneath it. A shaft nobody had properly accounted for when the pond was built. No one died in the spill itself. That fact gets repeated so often it almost sounds like good news. It isn't. It just means the damage took longer to show up. Number 5. Martin County's water has never fully recovered. More than 2 decades after the slurry spill, residents still report water running discolored, tasting of chemicals, or violating federal safety standards. A University of Kentucky study found nearly half the household samples tested contained at least one contaminant above allowable limits. Only about 1 in 8 residents surveyed said they actually drink their own tap water, relying instead on bottled water for a system that is supposed to deliver something safe straight to the tap. The disaster made international headlines once, in 2000. The consequences never left, they just stopped being news, which is a very different thing from stopping altogether. Number 4. When catastrophic flooding hit this region in 2022, almost nobody had flood insurance to fall back on. Across the 10 hardest-hit counties, roughly 2% of households carried a policy through the federal flood insurance program. In the 3 worst-hit areas, that number dropped to about 1%. This isn't a story about people ignoring a warning. Standard flood maps here have historically underestimated risk in narrow mountain valleys because those maps were built for wide floodplains, not for creeks squeezed between 2 ridgelines that can rise a dozen feet in a matter of hours. Insurance has simply never been affordable or accessible at the scale this terrain demands. The water doesn't check anyone's paperwork before it rises. Number 3. Poverty made the 2022 disaster worse before the first drop of rain fell. In the 5 counties that recorded deaths, poverty rates ranged from roughly 26% in Perry County to nearly 37% in Clay County, both well above the already elevated regional average. Poverty here isn't a character flaw, it's a structural condition, decades in the making, tied directly to the boom and bust economics of an industry the whole region was built around and, in recent decades, largely abandoned by. Fewer savings means fewer people can rebuild without help. Older housing stock means more homes sitting low in the exact narrow valleys where water collects fastest. When the water came, it hit hardest in exactly the places least equipped to absorb the blow. That's not a coincidence. That's cause and effect wearing a different name. Number 2. Between July 26th and August 1st, 2022. Catastrophic flooding tore through the region and killed at least 39 people directly, with 2 additional deaths during cleanup, making it the deadliest natural disaster to hit eastern Kentucky in more than 80 years. The North Fork of the Kentucky River at Jackson set a new record crest, breaking a mark that had stood since 1939. At Whitesburg, the river rose so fast it destroyed the gauge meant to measure it, climbing past 21 feet before the equipment simply failed. Over 600 people were pulled out by helicopter alone, with countless more rescued by boat in the dark. Entire homes were found stripped down to bare foundations, not damaged, just gone, as if the valley had reset itself back to bedrock. Number 1. Here's the part almost nobody connects. Scientists studying the 2022 floods point directly at decades of mountaintop removal mining as a factor that made the disaster worse. Flattened land sheds rainwater faster instead of absorbing it. Buried streams and compacted mine soil send water downhill in a rush instead of a trickle. Add a climate that now produces roughly 20 to 40% more heavy rainfall than it did a century ago, and you get water with nowhere natural left to go, funneled straight into the same narrow hollows where people have always built their homes. Because in mountains this steep, the narrow hollow is usually the only flat ground there is. It was never really a choice between the hollow and somewhere safer. For most families here, the hollow has always been the only ground available. This isn't 17 separate dangers scattered across a map. It's one region, built on some of the most dramatic geology east of the Mississippi, where the same industry that shaped its mountains for over a century also quietly reshaped how those mountains handle water. The land didn't become dangerous overnight. It was made that way, decision by decision, permit by permit, over generations, and the people living in these hollows inherited every bit of it, whether they ever mined a single ton of coal themselves or not. So tell me, are you from one of these counties, and did this list get anything wrong? Locals always catch the details outsiders miss, whether it's a mispronounced creek name or a hometown that deserved a spot on this list and didn't get one. I want to hear all of it. Your comments genuinely shape what gets covered next on this channel, so don't hold back, and don't be shy about defending your corner of these mountains. And if this kept you watching this long, you know what to do. hit subscribe because Appalachia has a lot more geography left to explain, and outsiders are only just starting to hear about it.